Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Eric Wall, and I am the chair of the San Francisco section of the AIAA, and I will be your host for this event. Just a quick word about who we are, just for those people who may not be familiar. So AIAA stands for the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And basically our mission is to help aerospace professionals and their organizations succeed. In fact, we are the world's largest professional aerospace technical society, and we serve as an advocate for the aerospace industry. We have nearly 30,000 members, including a fair number of corporate and student members across 91 countries. And basically, we want to be the voice of the aerospace profession through innovation, technical excellence, and global leadership. And really in terms of there's a wide range of what that means, and I'm happy to talk more. Anybody who would like more information can either go to the National's website, or they can email me. I'll put my email address up on the screen later on. But anyway, we do a variety of different events, both at the national level, where we do all sorts of different conferences and career fair events and publications and education type stuff, and just really a whole variety of stuff. And here at the local level, we also do various things like virtual dinner meetings, young professional get-togethers, happy hours, outreach to colleges and K through 12 students, some honors and award stuff, public policy, career development, and so on. So again, very happy to talk with anybody who would like more information. And like I said, I'll leave my email up at the end. In the meantime, let's get to the people that you're really here to listen to. Just a quick note. Basically, feel free to throw your questions into the Q&A box. We'll only really be paying attention to that and not the chat, so make sure it goes in Q&A. And then at the end of the main presentation, we'll have a time for Q&A at the end. And so I'll help with curating the questions and get some good answers for you. Anyway, so to start us off, brief bios. Dr. David Livingston is the founder and host of The Space Show at www.thespaceshow.com, which is a live broadcast internet talk radio program covering all aspects of space development, exploration, policy, business, economics, and advocacy. The Space Show also provides real-time listener participation in all programs using either email or phone calls. Programs are archived and made available as podcasts, with each program having its own special blog for listener discussion. Kim Holder's lifelong interest in space and futurism led her to found Moonwords, a shared virtual environment that models an advanced town on the moon. You can download the alpha version of this at moonwards.com, which is spelled MOONWARDS.com. John Jossy has a bachelor's degree in physical science with a minor in astronomy from UC Berkeley. He has held positions in quality engineering and management in the defense and medical device industries in Silicon Valley for 40 years. Currently retired, he is an avid amateur astronomer and advocates for space settlement through his blog, spacesettlementprogress.com. And with that, I'll turn it over to the stars of our show.
Okay, so we've agreed, we've worked it out. I'm going to take the first question here. David, I'm very glad to have this way of chatting with you. And here's something that I know is always something that I've enjoyed talking to you about. You have a DBA, a doctorate in business administration, and you got that in the 90s at the time when the space industry was very different. What led you to decide at that time to go back to school and do your thesis on outer space commerce?
Hi, Kim, thank you. And first, Eric, thank you for putting this together. And AIAA and the space show and me as an individual go way, way back. When I was working on my dissertation in the late 90s, I used the AIAA library of reviewed and almost reviewed documents and papers extensively to work on my dissertation, to learn about aerospace engineering and related topics that I really didn't know anything about. I accessed the documents through the Linda Hall Research Library, which is in Kansas. And I often track down the authors of these AIAA papers, sometimes a decade earlier. And every one of them was just enormously helpful. They gave their time. They couldn't have been friendlier when I met them at conferences. It was like we were old friends. And I can't say enough about AIAA. They've been a sponsor of the space show for many, many years. And I really hope we go back to conferences and events in person because of all the events I miss. I miss the AIAA meetings probably more than any of the other ones that I've attended. So it's really an honor to be here and be part of AIAA and the San Francisco chapter tonight. Kim, I finished all my classwork for my doctorate degree in the early to mid 80s. And I actually started a dissertation. I was a late bloomer for all my graduate work. So first of all, even starting the DBA program, I think it took me going to night school and part-time about 5 years or 6 years just to complete all my classwork in my oral exams, given how frequently some classes were offered. Sometimes you'd have to wait out a semester to get a class, that type of thing. But I did complete all of that in the early to mid 80s, about the time my second son was born. And I actually started my dissertation on an esoteric segment of real estate financing, which was pretty popular at the time. But it didn't seem to be so important to me anymore. And having 2 kids and other things just seemed to focus differently on me rather than writing a doctoral dissertation. And I was pretty much self-employed back then. And I didn't really see the degree as being so altogether essential for anything I was going to do in the future. So I put my dissertation on standby and I forgot about it. And in the mid 90s, I got a letter from my university saying that my term under the accreditation agencies for my university was about to expire and I would never ever be able to finish the DBA that I started unless by X date I submitted a qualified accepted thesis proposal. My school wanted, you had to produce a proposal and have the dissertation committee approve the proposal. Then all you had to do is write the dissertation with the approval of your advisors. So we didn't have to defend the actual document. We had to defend our proposal to even get started. So I think I had 6 months to do that. So I really thought about it and I thought, well, you know, I sure as heck don't want to write a real estate thing. But if I can figure out how to do something on a topic I really, really love for a conservative business school, I'll consider doing it. So space was the topic I really loved. I've been a space nut since a little kid and I always was, but I had no idea how you could do a business school paper on space, because space was almost entirely government at the time. And there was a little bit of a maybe possible commercial sector, but it wasn't much. It wasn't very front line, even though people were certainly, as I found out, advocating for it. But I heard a guy from Stanford on an NPR show about going to Mars, Bruce Lucinian, and I called him up and told him what I was doing and asked if he would advise me on any commercial prospects for a business school dissertation. So, you know, he said, come on down, bring your title, which I guess was the business school equivalent of what you need for a proposal. And, you know, it sounded like those car ads in California. So I met Bruce on many different occasions, and he introduced me to what was alt space back then, which is now new space. and to the idea of commercial space tourism, which I really loved. And he introduced me to Patrick Collins, who is an economist doing all the space tourism economic market studies at the time that were valid. And Patrick and I became really good friends. He's a UK economist teaching economics in Japan. And Patrick introduced me to other people, and Bruce introduced me to the head of the Boeing Commercial Space Division at the time, Harvey Willenberg. And I became very good friends with Harvey. And Bruce and Harvey eventually helped me craft a commercial space proposal that I really liked because it was my passion. And now I could really write a dissertation on something I truly loved, just not something that was an academic topic. I had to get professors at my graduate school to sign off on it. And I found two guys that didn't laugh me out of their office and that were willing to sign off on it. And both of them were some of my MBA teachers. We had great relationships. So I had a team of 4 people, and I presented a proposal that was very challenging, and most of the committee thought I was crazy, and it passed by 1 vote. And the week after I got the dissertation proposal passed, Newsweek did a featured article on the comedy of space tourism as an idea. It was a giggle factor was what it was called back then. And but I won the proposal by 1 vote, and it took me until 2001 to write it because I self-taught myself. This is something you can appreciate, Kim. Aerospace engineering, physics, orbital dynamics, rocketry, space policy and law. I mean, I didn't really at the time know all of this existed. And I had a lot of help along the way with people from AIAA and other people I met at conferences. People were not shy about giving me their time to teach me something. And, you know, I ended up in January of 2001 publishing the dissertation, which at the time was very cutting edge. It was about expanding space commerce and starting space tourism. And now all of a sudden, my little conservative school had the only dissertation on the subject in the country back then. So it was a cutting edge dissertation that's clearly different in today's world. But they threw me a champagne party, and the guy that turned it down, the group that turned it down were apologizing to me for having voted against it because they were so clueless as to what commercial space and space tourism was really about. They thought it was kind of goofball stuff, the giggle factor. So, you know, if I had done this younger in my life, I would have probably never done anything on space because I wouldn't be thinking about sort of following your dream, doing your passion, putting your time and energy into something like that. You'd probably be thinking about how to advance your career. Maybe you're going to school at the expense of your boss and they want you to study something, or your professors want you to write on a topic that they're interested in, and they'll direct you if you write that topic. So I had a lot of leeway doing it later in life and on my own terms. And when I did it, there was clearly no concept of a radio show or anything like this. That wasn't even in my consciousness. And in fact, when I graduated in January of 2001, I was in that category of so many people saying, what's next? And at the time, I really had no answer to what's next. But, you know, briefly, I know you all want to interview me, but I'm very impressed by, John, your blog that you've put together. It's incredible. I urge people to go to it, Space Progress, spacesettlementprogress.com. And Kim, Moonward is one of the most exciting programs and projects and inspiring and challenging and innovative projects I've seen in the nearly 20 years of doing the space show. Can you guys each quickly tell us what led you to taking that on, John in retirement, and Kim, this I guess is close to your life's work.
Want to go first, Kim? Or
Oh, okay.
Kim, why don't you go first since you asked the question first?
All right. I had health problems for most of my life. I had a fatigue condition, and that's why I ended up in Mexico. I'm Canadian, but I was looking for a way to heal. And when I managed to find a way to heal, I was looking for a life project because I didn't have a need to work, and I was in a foreign culture. So I wanted to do something that would I just felt had meaning. So like you, I ended up looking back at my passion for space and looking at the skills I had, because I did go to art college, and I searched for a way to be able to use my art background, my sculpture background, to do something to help the space community, and that became Mooners.
Well, first I'd like to thank AIAA for hosting this. And in my case, like Kim and David, I've always been interested in space. I grew up during the Apollo era, and you know, used to play with kids that we were astronauts. And then when I got into high school, I started to get interested in astronomy itself. I made telescopes by hand. And then in the 70s, I read The High Frontier by Gerard K. O'Neill, and I was hooked on space settlement at that time. And you know, I didn't end up majoring in astronomy, but I did get into advocating for space settlement through membership in the National Space Society. I actually published a newsletter called Space Colonization Progress back in the 90s. And that's actually on the vintage part of my website. You can check that out. But and then you know, I had kids and was working in the medical device industry, so I got sidetracked. But then I started listening to the space show. I commuted with David half an hour both directions to work and then back, and there's just such a rich discussion of all things space on the space show that it inspired me to get back involved in it and to start blogging on it. So I don't know if that answers your question, David.
Well, it does, and I strongly urge people who hear this or watch this video to check out Moonwords and John's blog. They're exceptional, and I think they're making great contributions to a lot of the reasons why all of us do things in the space community.
So I have your second question, David. You know, we still don't have affordable routine space tourism, you know, at least for the average person. Why is it taking so long?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. So first of all, I think many of us who follow this industry and we think it's taking too long, I think in a way we've fallen on the idea of unexpected, unrealized expectations that weren't warranted in the first place. So I think there's been aggressive and excessive promotion, and I think the promoters have been well-meaning, but they have underestimated how hard it has been to do what they set out to do, which was to do suborbital flight, and to do it routinely, and to do it multiple times a day, and to scale up an X Prize winning vehicle that barely won the X Prize safely into carrying 7 or 8 passengers, and then doing this multiple times a day, not just in New Mexico, but in other locations, plus others having similar ideas that didn't even make it that far, that went bankrupt and went under. So it's harder than they thought. It costs a lot more money than they thought. There have been accidents along the way where it has taken time to understand those accidents and how to mitigate against them. Regulatory things and policies have had to evolve. especially around liability, not just federal liability, but also state liability. And a lot of the people doing the design and the engineering work really didn't have the experience. It's been a lot of on-the-job learning through testing, and the tests don't work, and then, you know, it's back to school, and going back to school takes quite a while. So I think it's been a rough, long, hard journey that was unexpected by the companies, and we, the people out here rooting them on and thinking space tourism was just 2 years away. I think we have been misled, but we haven't been misled for any sinister or evil reason. And I think part of that being misled has been our eagerness to really want what our fantasies are, what we truly believe in, and to kind of not look at the hard realities, you know, the grounded stuff that you have to do to accomplish all of this. Scaling up an 8-passenger vehicle from a vehicle that carried a person barely to space and barely safety is a really big deal. But we didn't play it as a really big deal. We thought, wow, they'll be ready to go in 2 years, 3 years. You know, they won the X Prize. And look, that was in 2004. So I think there's a lot of things that have happened, and we still don't have it except for very wealthy people who have been able to do space tourism to the International Space Station with the Russians.
So I kind of have a follow-up question to that. You know, with SpaceX's efforts and others bringing the cost of launching rockets down, is suborbital tourism going to go out of style? Is it no longer attractive?
So it's hard to say that, especially when it hasn't started. So it's very hard to know if something is going to go out of style before you even have the first commercial flights. I believe that it won't go out of style, but there are some qualifications to my belief. So no matter how low the price gets for SpaceX, orbital tourism is still going to be a couple of $1 million. You're not going to, even if all you're going to do is 3 or 4 orbits around the Earth and then come back, it's just going to be a mighty hefty ticket. And suborbital tourism, the more they do it and the more success they have, in theory, the prices might come down so that more and more people can enjoy it. But there are some concerns I have. For one is, how deep is the market? So usually you have a market and people become repeat customers, right? So you buy Toyotas. How often do you buy a Toyota? You may buy a new car every 2 or 3 years or every 5 years, but you're going to buy a new car. You buy TVs, maybe now you don't have to buy them very often, but you're going to buy another TV if your TV breaks. How many people are going to do 2 and 3 and 4 suborbital tourism flights? And are they going to say, well, I did one from Mojave and maybe I can do one from Denmark and maybe I can do one from South America and I'll get a different view? Well, will you get that much of a different view where it's worth several $100,000 to do it? So there is a question of the depth of the market once the current inventory goes through. Some other issues are, since this market hasn't really started yet, what are the regulations really going to be like? What are the policies? What's going to shape out if there are any accidents? How is this going to be dealt with? And what are the real prices going to be for people down the road a year or two into this? Are they going to come down a lot? So I think there are reasons why suborbital may face challenges, but I don't think it'll be competition from orbital. The price gap is just too huge. And if someone wants to go to space and they're not in the $1 million category, but they can go for 15 or 20 minute joyride and they really want to go to space, suborbital is their avenue. And I think they'll take that avenue.
Thanks.
Okay, now I want to go back and talk about something that comes on every space show. It's part of your mission statement. And I'd like to get at why you created this mission statement and what you think it means for people's actions in space. The space show is committed to advancing integrity and responsibility, both in our off-Earth conduct and in the potential long-range consequences of our actions in space. I kind of flubbed that, but you know what I'm saying.
So years and years ago, and signal me if I'm using up too much time, I went to an incredible Space Frontier Foundation meeting in Phoenix on new space. It was still alt space, but on alt space companies figuring out how to better tell the story to garner more support from the general public and to sort of cast a different shadow and picture of what space companies were like. Because in many sense, they were portrayed, we're seeing a little bit of that now, by the way, as money grubbing, greedy, companies that were going to trash the space environment, just like we're trashing the Earth environment. And this seminar, it was 2 or 3 days in Phoenix, actually it was in Scottsdale, if I'm remembering correctly. And they had the people come in to help us craft mission statements and vision statements and to really brainstorm on how to work to shift how alt space was in many ways being portrayed. I don't remember when this was, but the space show had already started. So I would say it would be the very early 2000s, because the space show really started in June 2001. So this was maybe in the neighborhood of 2003, 2004, something like that. And so we each, and many of the people that are household words were at this event. And they have successful companies and are household names. And so one of the things I did, because I was getting feedback on the early years of the space show, that how do we know people going into space and having a space business aren't going to ruin space and ruin the moon and just destroy everything? Mars wasn't such a big thing back then, just like what business is doing here on Earth. And I remember speaking at an event years later in Houston, and I had a university professor say nobody should go to the moon. I did a paper presentation on going to the moon and commercially doing things on the moon. And this was a big Houston meeting. I think that was in 2010. And this person from, I don't want to say the name of the school because that may identify the speaker, although I can't remember the speaker's name, said nobody should be allowed to go to the moon. Commercial people should be kept away from it. And the only people that should be allowed to go to the moon are people doing work for the government or working for the government and doing government work, because that's the only way we can protect and save and take care of the lunar environment. And of course, one may wonder what lunar environment you're actually talking about taking care of, but that might be a discussion for another webinar. But so I crafted back in those early years that mission statement and vision statement that you're talking about. I also had done surveys of the venture capital industry for my dissertation, and I did get a lot of feedback about how they would never want to do anything in space because they don't want to be part of businesses ruining the space environment. So I had that as kind of feedback. So I'm thinking, okay, so let's talk about businesses being ethical in their behavior. And I remember when I gave talks about like the Ford Pinto making decisions based on how much their litigation would cost if they fixed the gas tanks from rear end explosions, or the Corvair with problems, or Firestone tires, versus just paying out on litigation. And I thought that was pretty trashy corporate behavior. And I used some of those examples in my talks that I gave at the time. So I was thinking, okay, let's make sure that commercial space companies don't behave the way Firestone did back then, or Ford, or Corvair, or a half a dozen others that you could cite as examples. The problem is that as I got to see more and more space entrepreneurs develop, they're pretty responsible people. And I honestly can't name any entrepreneurial space venture that I have ever come across that doesn't care about the environment, including whatever the environment is in space, and that doesn't care about quality and safety, and isn't dedicated to all of that. So now in 2021, why don't I change that? Well, I don't change that because you've still got some issues. One is orbital debris is a big issue. And right now the rules for orbital debris mitigation are largely voluntary. So, but if you're gonna put up a satellite, even a CubeSat, you really should put in the voluntary measure to try to make sure that you're not going to contribute to debris. New issues that have come up on space traffic management and docking, because now lots of people, not just NASA, know how to dock. And if we have orbital fuel depots at some point, you may have lines of vehicles wanting to dock there. You may down the road have space tugs trying to deal with this. And here's the latest example. You just saw a deal cut between NASA and SpaceX for warning each other of their positions of SpaceX's enormous number of satellites they're putting up for Starlink versus space traffic that NASA generates. And so they worked out an agreement where SpaceX would not have to move their hardware, but it would have to tell NASA where their hardware is and give them the orbital information. And NASA would be in charge of navigating their hardware to avoid collisions. That's really advanced ethical behavior. And companies are doing this voluntarily. And as we see space traffic management, the potential for fuel depots, maybe a lunar gateway down the road with more than one country or entity wanting to dock at it, and even space hotels with multiple docking ports. These are all big issues. So I've left that statement the way it is because the ethical issues to me have evolved from something like really nasty corporate behavior to things like we need to really all cooperate on traffic management. We need to cooperate on how you dock. We need to cooperate on satellite debris and other debris issues. And down the road, I really do believe we'll have qualified, if not true, property rights. And we will have mining operations maybe on the moon with different countries. And we need to obey and honor and respect the zones of operation for country A or company A versus company B or C. And that is clearly going to be voluntary because right now we don't have any really military or legal enforcement to enforce any of that. So I think there's a lot of grounds for ethical and good behavior as space evolves in the way the space community wants it to evolve. I know that's a long-winded answer, but
well, there's a lot to the question, and we could get more into it, but I'm going to say, John, you take over and maybe we'll come back to this if there's time.
Okay, well, this is kind of related to it, but I think many people take for granted the impact of space on our lives. And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of factors that are influencing our everyday activities in space, like, you know, using apps for GPS positioning, weather forecasting, banking and finance, telecommunications, defense and stuff. So how does the space show educate the public on the value of space?
Because we're live broadcast and listeners have the option of talking to the guest on a toll-free line or emailing, and I wish more did both. As you know, I make appeals for that on all shows. But we certainly afford the listeners the opportunity to hear from the people doing the work, making the policy, doing the innovating, you know, that type of stuff. But one of the ways I like to answer that question is to talk about how Neil deGrasse Tyson once answered it. And I like to think that the space show helps drive this point home. So, and Neil said this on one of his space show programs that he came on right after he had testified before Congress. And he told members of Congress, and they asked similar questions. How do you value the importance of space? How do you help convey that? So he said, go around the house at night and remove everything during the evening and overnight. I'm reading from one of his comments. In the home was brought to you or inspired by space exploration. And then when you wake up, none of it exists anymore. And so you're going to wake up with poor vision, among other things. And he talked about the electronics would not be in your house. But also, let's talk about agriculture. Almost all of agriculture is space engineered through GPS, NOAA weather satellites, all sorts of things. We have farmers that call our show that use space hardware, plowing a field with tractors and using space weather to help plant and get more yield. You wouldn't have anything coming to you that was delivered through transportation or trucks. Trucks are saving millions, probably hundreds of millions of gallons of fuel by being GPS directed. It's incredible. And the same thing with aviation. If we weren't using space to help drive commercial trucking and delivery service and other things, not only would the costs be significantly higher, the environmental costs would be higher, and your deliveries would be fewer and further in between, and your products would be a lot higher. Medical, I could go down the list. So if we move overnight, everything that is space derived or space connected from your living, by the way, your car's not going to start if you have a somewhat late model car. And if you have any drugs that might have been the result of liquid protein growth and experiments on the space shuttle or the space station, we got to get rid of all of that drug manufacturing, because that's not there either. We could just keep going down the list. What would your life be like? Maybe 1880 in the days of Gunsmoke in Dodge City, or maybe a little bit more advanced in New York with lamplighters and horse and buggies and people having jobs to go around and pick up after the horses. So space is part of our life, and our economy is almost 100% dependent upon it. And the space show is absolutely dedicated to driving this home any way we can do it, as long as we stick to the facts, as long as we're reality based, and as long as we try to make it very personal, so that you can connect with it. If it's not personal, and if it's just academic or theoretical, you're not going to connect with it. Back in the day, as if I'm that old, which hopefully I'm not, but in the early days of the space show, we talked about, not just me, but people at Space Frontier Foundation conferences, how do you get the public to know and appreciate more about space? And believe me, we weren't as connected to space even closely like we are now. And everybody thought, let's put labels on products. So back then there were TV advertising things about made in the USA, made by labor in the USA with an American flag. And there was a little jingle. So they wanted to put on space-derived products, made in space by the USA, or made in space with the help of NASA, or something like that, so that people could start to personalize and connect what they're using to coming from space. Of course, that really never happened. I still don't think it's a bad idea. But so that's part of the space show's educational task, is to connect those dots to the value of space, so that people quit saying, why the hell are you going to space? Look at all this work we have to do right here on the planet. You're wasting your money. You're destroying the environment. And you all know, I've read some of the letters that I've gotten on the air. And by the way, I invite these people on the show every single time, and every single time they will not come on the show. You might ask yourself that question, but they still are entitled to an opinion, and I'm willing to give them a platform. But the job is to educate to that platform, to those people, that think that way, and to try to get them to see that what they're talking about is not correct. Just like the letter, the article, the op-ed, John, that you sent out a couple of days ago about how bad SpaceX is for what they're doing and wanting to go to Mars, and nomenclature and this and that and the other. You know, it's a big job to connect people to why space is so valuable and beneficial in our lives. But that's what we're dedicated about doing. And yes, people, I do know there's an opportunity cost. So if the space community didn't exist, probably some of this stuff would exist, or something similar would exist, having been created by other forces that got money, that were innovative, maybe by the military. But, you know, we can play the opportunity cost all day long, and we can play the what if all day long. We have an incredible humanity that is connected to help people in Africa without technology, just as it is to help people in San Francisco at the University of California Medical Center, all through space. And that's the game, and that's what we have to work with on the ground. And to not pursue that is really, in my opinion, detrimental to the welfare of everybody on this planet. And by the way, we will have a show coming up with a guy who runs the Space African Network, who is bringing this space technology into the darkest parts of Africa, where you only have electricity a couple of hours a day. And yeah, I know Northern California is on its way to being the same way, but we're not there yet with our power outages. But I'm telling you, space is everywhere. And just because they're in remote Africa doesn't mean that they don't get the benefit the same way we do. And Kim gets the benefit in Mexico the same way we do. It's all kind of transparent, and we're all better off for it.
Great answer. Okay, Kim, next.
Well, so we've talked about the contributions of space up till now, and these days space is really mushrooming. It's the curve has really steepened. Where do you think it's going? What do you see happening in that scene over the next decade, let's say?
Well, a couple of things. I think you need the government sector. So I am not one of these that says new space, commercial space, to hell with NASA and the government. We don't need that. I disagree with that completely. I think we need NASA and government space, and we need to have very successful public-private partnerships and agreements with NASA and public space. And so there are some risks out there that could really interfere with things. So let me do the risk real quick. There are financial risks. We could see financial markets go to hell and back. You hear this every day with different gurus coming on TV and the radio about the perils of our current financial situation. We could see regulations and legal issues become excessive to the point where they stifle innovation and creativity and new business. And we're not seeing that at this point. But those are risks, those are challenges. And we can see, in terms of human spaceflight, accidents that kill people that really should not have happened. In fact, an accident is something that shouldn't have happened in the first place, but they cause really big setbacks. So, okay, let's get those out of the way. So now, in a really great world, I would like to think that in 10, 12 years from now, we have a thriving U.S. national space sector that is not so special. I'd like to see it be more routine and not so commanding of all this attention, like the transportation sector, for example, or the agricultural sector of our economy. So for that to happen, we have to do a lot of evolution. We have to do a lot of growing, and we have to reach a lot more people, and we have to broaden our markets considerably. But I'd like to see us make progress toward being more routine and being really, truly an economic sector that is many, many times bigger than what it is now. I know the big financial houses, the banks, talk about $1 trillion economy coming out of space by the 2040s. maybe that'll happen. I don't have big crystal ball, so I can't tell you that. But, and they say the first trillionaire is going to be someone who made that $1 trillion in a space business. Maybe, you know, it'd be nice if that were true, but, you know, we'll see. But also for the US to have this kind of space economy, it means globally we have to have this kind of space economy. So for me, that means somehow that our adversaries in space, I'm not saying we have to bury the hatchet and we have to become all one and sing Kumbaya every Friday night, but we have to be able to work together and do more things. So Dr. Chaim Benaroya, who I know the two of you know very well, who is a Rutgers professor, is one of the leading people probably on the globe on lunar habitats, was on my John Batchelor segment earlier this week. And he was asked if Russia has a lunar base, China has a lunar base because they now have a memorandum of understanding, the US has a lunar base, and ESA has a lunar base. Will they be able to talk and interrelate with each other? Or, you know, will they be surrounded by barbed wire? And not only will orbital and lunar mechanics stop you from going from one to the other, but there's no way you could dock. There's no way you could tap into their oxygen. There's no way you could do anything. And he said that would be ideal if we could interrelate and interreact with all these different parties. But to do that and to have that available in 10 or 12 years with lunar habitats, you need to start on that today. There are no standards. There are no protocols for it. There's absolutely zero hardware for it. There's no will being expressed to have that kind of interchangeability. So for my vision of where I would like to see commercial space and government space for the US and the globe to be where I think humanity is best served, as well as businesses being best served, we have a lot of work to do, because I don't think it's us and them separate from each other if we're all on the moon. Why the hell can't we go visit and get over to a Chinese enclave on the moon, assuming we figure out how to move on the surface and, you know, do the technology that's needed to do. We're not there yet either. A lot of work needs to be done to get a space economy where I would like to see it. And I'm optimistic that we can make good progress in doing that. I don't think, Kim, that there's a destination here. I think this is one of those things where, you know, it's the process that counts. Are you making progress? Are you moving toward some kind of an end goal, some kind of an outcome? But you probably never reach the perfect outcome. You're always striving, just like we're striving to have better cities here in this country and in your country. Does that answer you?
I believe it does. John?
Okay. Well, again, kind of in a similar vein, there is a big debate, I think, among the space settlement advocates about where is the best destination to establish a permanent outpost. It could be the moon, it could be the Mars, it could be free space, rotating habitats. This is kind of a two-part question for you. Do you have a preference, or should it be all of the above? And then what is your sense of the space show listeners? Is there a preference among them?
Okay, so space show listener preference first. Mars, overwhelmingly. It's not debatable. Now, it's tolerable for the Mars folks to go to the moon. About half think that going to the moon to learn how to do things is probably essential, and the other half think that they can kind of maybe just bypass or tweak the moon and go directly to Mars. But overwhelmingly, the destination is Mars, Mars, Mars. Okay, so, and nobody's changing their mind. Now, there are people that want to go to 50 miles up in the Venetian atmosphere. There are people, I've had some people say we need to go to Titan. Don't laugh, we know it's cold out there, but it's a great place. Ceres is another place that has piqued interest, and maybe Europa, and maybe a couple of other places. But Mars is it. So the discussion that John is asking, I'm looking at the list of those attending, and unfortunately I don't know all of you, but I do know some of you are not space cadets. So John is what is classified as an O'Neillian, and so Dr. O'Neill, who died way too early at Princeton of cancer, asked his physics class what is the best place to start a civilization off Earth, and do we need to do that on the surface of another planet, or could we do that in a free orbiting space, kind of like a big space station? So there are a lot of advantages to that. Number one is you can spin it at artificial 1G and pretty well get rid of all of your microgravity problems on the human body. But others want to go to the surface of the moon. They want to go to Mars. They want to live on a planet's surface. So from my point of view, I don't think it's one or the other. And I really hate Sophie's choices for the space community. So for those of you not familiar with what I mean by the term is Sophie's choice, to save time, Google the movie Sophie's Choice. If we can make progress toward the vision I have for commercial space and for our overall space presence, I don't see any reason why John and his group can't figure out a way to finance and engineer the perfect place to go to space for his interest, while Tim can't figure out how to do moonwards right on the surface of the real moon. Why does it have to be one or the other? So my preference personally is I think I'd rather be on the surface of the moon or the surface of Mars or the surface on someplace. I would love to go exploring on the surface and do things that I know I'll never be able to do, but I would love to do that. But why not be able to do them all? If we have a true spacefaring economy, why should we have to choose one or the other? Why can't it be just like I say in my vision statement? It'd be just like going to Tahiti or any other place that you want to go to, and you can make that choice. If you can get the ticket, if you can get the time, and you want to go to Tahiti, and somebody else wants to go to New Zealand, what difference does it make? You go to Tahiti, you go to New Zealand, and have a great time. I think space ultimately should be the same, and we shouldn't have to make choices. For R&D purposes, I can actually see benefits to both locations. I can see a very important benefit for a lunar habitat to learn how to do things on the surface of the moon, to learn how to build, to learn how to shield really well from radiation, to learn how to deal with microgravity, a lot of things, and to how to deliver power to the habitat on the moon, how to deal with injuries, accidents, how do you do surgery if you need to do surgery on somebody on the moon in microgravity. And I can see benefits to being in an orbital hotel or a much larger research station like the Gateway that is planned by the Gateway Foundation, not what the government is planning. Whether that ever happens or not is another story. But so I see R&D and informational and instructional and leadership and all sorts of benefits from going for both brass rings. And I really hope we don't end up excluding one for the other as we go on down the road of developing our policy, funding space ventures, and deciding on what the next mission is. I know the government, decides on missions every 10 years, right? And then other good missions are just left by the wayside. Maybe they get picked up if there's private money some way, or maybe they'll get picked up with another 10-year decadal survey. I hope that doesn't happen as we grow the economy and become a truly space economic powerhouse.
Great. So how much time do we have left? Because we could go into the gravity prescription if you want.
Well, Eric, what's our timing for, I think we have 30 minutes left, correct?
Yeah. I would say you could probably get in another question or two, and then we could switch over to Q&A.
Well, let me ask the two of you, because the space show only exists because I have guest listeners and supporters, and the two of you have been both guests, and you are avid listeners, and you're both supporters. So you're the other half of the space show. If I didn't have people such as yourself, and I'm looking at the list of attendees, and I don't want to offend anybody by not mentioning your name, but I see lots of guests and callers and listeners and supporters, and I'm grateful to all of you. So I'm not trying to omit you, but what do you see for next 10 years? John, how do you see our space in the private sector as well as the public sector continuing on? Are we going to be in good shape? Are we facing really throttling back challenges? How do you see things?
Well, I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic about the future of space development. I see progress being made by SpaceX on bringing launch costs down and reliability of large launch vehicles. Space tourism seems to be on the verge. It's no longer 2 years away. It's now like 1 year away. So I think that's going to be progressing. The Biden administration seems to be continuing the same policy that was established by the Trump administration. So there may be maybe some delays in Artemis, but we seem to be moving forward there. So I think we're making steady progress. I see a lot of small companies making really innovative advancements in space technology, debris removal, small launch. There's even some advancements in nuclear power that are pretty exciting. So I'm optimistic. I can't really, I don't have a crystal ball to say what it'll be like in 10 years, but I think we'll be making progress.
Kim?
I don't know if it'll be in 10 years, but the big thing for me, I think it will be, is that suddenly I think we're going to be at a point where what you were saying about we don't have to choose a destination, that's going to be a reality, that our capabilities will expand rather suddenly, and we'll suddenly be able to go all kinds of different places, and there'll be a bunch of different businesses going on. And one of the main reasons why I do Moonwars is because I'm trying to convince a broader audience that that's true and that it really matters. And like Chaim was saying on Hotel Mars today, or yesterday, that the issue is that in order to have that proceed in a healthy manner, let's say, the work has to be done now. Because it's just going to overtake us. I really believe that if it isn't the Starship, then it might be Bezos's ships, it might be Chinese ships, it might be Relativity, it might be Rocket Lab, there might be one of the 7 companies that started in the last month that nobody's heard of yet. The day is going to dawn, and all of a sudden, from being frustrated for so long, there's going to be so much going on that we'll be confused about the right way to go. And barring external factors, I think that's what we're in for.
Well, and I wish Dr. Benaroya was on listening, but his comment that if this is a goal and this is really how we'd like to see space evolve and this is really not based on politics or anything like that, but on what those of us in the space industry know space can do. I'm not talking about all googly eyes and, fantasy and all of that. I mean, we know the reality. I know the reality for medical reasons that the two of you know, and that I've talked to on the show about the power of space. And I'm sure other people do too. We really need to have policymakers and people thinking very forward and starting this work now. And we need to be able to diplomatically somehow connect even with our adversaries. I know that's challenging, but I guess where there's a will, there's a way. And hopefully that all seems to happen. I think we're really going to sell humanity short if we don't evolve toward a space economy with the kind of benefits that I think those of us in the industry and maybe those of us who just follow space know are possible. And while we think we know what's possible, I'll bet most of what appears in 10 years will be things that wasn't even in our consciousness. If we go back and listen to this recording in 10 years, we won't even have considered or thought about or even known to talk about much of what has unfolded in that 10th year.
Right.
Eric, you want to take some of the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, a couple quick notes just for people in general. Number one, if you want to look at the full biographies of any of our guests here, including links to their various projects, you can find that on AIAA San Francisco's website on the event page. And again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A box, not the chat screen. Okay. Oh, and also I apologize in advance if I accidentally mispronounced somebody's name. First question is from Dan Adamo. According to today's AIAA daily launch, SpaceX will fly a specially modified Crew Dragon with a domed window at its apex on the Inspiration 4 mission. There's no mention of a flight test for this new configuration before it launches to become the first SpaceX tourism mission in LEO. Does this sound responsible or ethical, or am I missing something?
First, listeners, for those of you who don't really know who Dan Adamo is, and I hope, Dan, if you're not going to mind for me to sort of introduce you. And Dan is retired NASA, and he did docking and orbital dynamics with the space shuttle and related for many, many, many years. I mean, he was right in the heart of it, and he is probably the most amazing aerospace engineer and expert in these fields and on flight hardware. And I would absolutely 100% defer to Dan, and he is one of the people that I talk about that has taught me much over the years of doing the space show. And I treasure and value his willingness and his patience to teach a non-math guy, or to at least work with me to understand what he's talking about. So I would certainly defer to his judgment on this, but this is what I can say. I do know, and believe me, I'm not an aerospace engineer or expert, that, and Dan or somebody can correct me, the early British passenger jets, and I forget the name of it, they crashed at the loss of a lot of life. And ultimately, the investigations led to the cause of the shape of the windows in the airplane. And maybe someone knows the story much better than me, but the reason we have these little tiny oval windows in airplanes comes from the research that came about because of these crashes from the early British passenger jet. I don't remember if it was a Comet or something else. So I do know that windows are a really big issue. And I know that Ben Arroyo was asked once, I think on the most recent space show program, about lunar habs on the surface and putting windows in them. And he was very quick to say, no, especially early on as we're learning and developing and evolving with the technology, because the windows weaken the structure. They do this, they do that. The product that the window is made of, it doesn't have the same structural integrity as the hull of your habitat, or even trying to put a window in a lava tube, for example. And so he was very clear that early lunar habitats and settlements would not have windows in them. I don't know, maybe John and Kim both heard that show. I did not see the AIAA announcement, and I don't know how they can put windows in it without testing it, because of the very little I know about the structural integrity of these things. But I also remember at a Space Foundation meeting many years ago, Blue Origin had their New Shepard capsule on display. And as I recall, it had big windows in the side of it. Now, I don't know if that's the version that has been test flown. I don't know very much about it. But I would say SpaceX likes to push the envelope. If they were flying that thing without people in it, and they weren't doing any test flights, but only their, computer testing and whatever they were doing, okay, if they blow up the vehicle or crash it, big deal. But if they're actually flying it with people on board, and they haven't done any test flights with a window of any kind in the vehicle, especially in the dome, I would think that would probably not be very ethical by a lot of people's standards. But they would have to show why they'd have to make the case of why they think it's okay to do that. And I don't know what their answer could be, because again, I've heard this from Dan. I've heard this from Dr. Benaroya, who is one of my go-to guys and has been for 20 years. Even while I was still writing my dissertation, we used to speak together at conferences in Albuquerque. And he was a great assist to me and has been all my life. And these are people that I really respect, and they also really want to move out into space. They're not naysayers for space, and I would listen to them. And so I guess, Dan, I would say on the surface, I would say it's not very ethical, but I've also come over the years to not believe and accept everything that I read in magazines or reports, and often they don't tell the full story. So if this were something I really wanted to follow up and look into, I'd try to find out much more of the details about that and why they think it's okay to do that, and have more information. And then if I got that information, I'd probably run it by you and Benaroya to say, are these people on sound footing, or is this still pretty risky, and see what you think. I wouldn't just take the magazine article at face value, but the fact that you brought it to my attention is enough for me to pay serious attention to it. Want to do another one?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, question from Jeff about the past. With over 3,600 episodes spanning a pivotal period in the space industry, the space show is an incredible resource now and for future generations of space historians and enthusiasts. Do you have any plans to ensure that this archive survives in perpetuity? Might it find a permanent home online and/or in a physical archive hosted by a space-focused university or other institution?
So it is already backed up and archived in multiple places. So my family and a few people know where it is. But look, I'm planning to do the space show up until the point, and maybe beyond, where there will be a library on the moon. And the space show programs will then be donated to the lunar library. And probably Starlink or somebody will have internet services at the speed of light between Earth and the moon, so people can access the lunar library from right here on Earth. But hopefully down the road, and I'll still be around to see that happen, a lunar library might be the future home of the space show. People say, do I have somebody to take over after I either voluntarily give it up or end up giving it up because I've been called up to Mars. And no, I do not have somebody else to take it over. Look, the space show has turned into being really unique. A lot of it is based on my personality and how I want to do things. I have enormous help running the show with people such as John and Kim and Dan, and many of you, Bill, I see is listening, and others. So it's not a solo standalone venture by any means, but it is kind of my venture. I mean, I started it, I did build it into this. I wish I had built it into something different, but that's another story. I don't really see another person doing it, but I could see another person starting their own version of the space show. But I think the space show and its archives are the space show. And they tell the story right now of the past 20 years of a lot of the industry, not just new space, alt space, space tourism, commercial space investments, but policy, regulations, planetary science. A lot of people have had a platform, have been able to talk about their work, their books, and I want to keep the platform going. I know there's a lot of webinars, a lot of podcasts. There aren't too many live programs out there. This is a live program, but you know, we do an hour minimum in depth, often 2 hours, and sometimes over 2 hours. So a lunar library, that is a good goal for me to shoot for. And if we get to Mars and Musk decides that in his settlement on Mars that he's going to have a Martian library, maybe we can have a space show wing on the Martian library. After all, Musk was a very, very early guest on the space show long before he started SpaceX. So it would be appropriate that his Mars Oasis program was archived on a Martian library or in a Martian library.
Okay. Next question from Alan Livingston. AI is one of the fastest growing areas of research and development today. How do you see it impacting space development in the future? Do you see future international treaties covering this area related to space?
So let me do treaties first. They're very hard to do. They're very controversial and they're very political. And what I hear from one wing of the Space Attorney group, and it's a huge group, it is so much larger today than it was when I started the space show in 2001. It's not even funny. And it's all over the world. I mean, I was just on a webinar with space attorneys from Australia talking about property rights yesterday and space as a global commons. It's everywhere. It's like gone viral to be a space attorney. So they're everywhere, and they're going to find a way to leave their mark on everything, trust me. But I don't know, where's Alan's question? You took it off the line, so I can't read it.
Oh, it's at the bottom of the answered column.
At the bottom of the, oh, okay. Well, I don't see it, but.
I can reread it. So it says AI is one of the fastest growing.
AI, that's all you need to do. Yeah. So AI is already a really big deal, and it's advancing very, very rapidly. Most of the people in the industry, like Ben Arroyo, who I've talked about, maybe Dan would agree, although I haven't asked him about it lately. Most of the space construction that will take place on a lunar hab, probably even on Mars, probably even on an orbital O'Neillian station, or the Gateway, like is talked about with the Gateway Foundation, is all going to be done by AI and by robotics. Using human labor in space is costly. It's also dangerous. You have to deal with microgravity. You have to deal with artificial gravity if you're going to provide it, or microgravity. And you have a lot of other issues that humans just make everything more complicated and more expensive. So AI will continue to develop and advance. 3D printing is already a really big deal. There's a company right now that does 3D printing of rockets. And they're sort of in the demo period, you know, early stages of development. There's 3D printing going on in space and on the space station. And all of this is just going to become a much more significant part of the industry than anything we're doing right now. And I think most anything done outside the space capsule or the human environment is largely going to be robotic and driven by AI. John is really up on this. John, you want to offer a comment? You post about some of this on your blog. Why don't you comment on it? And Kim, Moonwards is all virtual and AI kind of technology and stuff, and building lunar cities. It's not being done by humans. John?
No, it's not. And I think initially we're going to be using telerobotic technology because AI isn't at the point where you can have completely autonomous machines yet. But I think where the future is in space manufacturing is going to be, and also building large structures in space is going to be self-replicating machines, which is going to be, driven by AI.
Very advanced AI.
Yeah, exactly.
Kim, on the moon, and even for Moonwards. We don't hear you.
You're muted, Kim.
Yeah, there was some background noise, so I muted.
Did the train go by?
No, it was a creaky chair, and it wasn't mine. Yeah, we all agree here. I think that in addition to the formula of how much cheaper transport has to get before things really blow up, the other thing is there'll be a tipping point beyond which robotics changes completely what we can do out there, and then that'll just feed upon itself. Short and sweet.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Next one is actually more, it's an informational comment, not a question, from Prasada Goganeni. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. The BOAC Comet, the windows developed fatigue cracks from the jet engine vibrations. The jet engines were mounted in the wing fuselage intersection, thus a great fatigue driver. So for moon habitat, which is static, this problem does not exist. But other issues like material life due to radiation exposure and subsequent leaks will be an issue.
Let me just direct you to listen to the last Space Show program with Dr. Benaroya when he addressed putting windows in a lunar habitat and what he had to say about why this would not happen early on but maybe later on as more and more technology and sophisticated construction was developed. And if you can't find that particular program, email me and I will send you the URL for that archive program. And if you hear it and you want to ask Dr. Benaroya about it, I'll be happy to put you in touch with him.
Okay. Next question from Joe Rosario. Do you see the Space Force as a hindrance, help, or insignificant to space tourism? I'm
going to say I see it as a help, but it's a long-term help, because number one, we don't have space tourism yet. Okay, so maybe Virgin will start later this year or next year. Who knows? I don't know anything about Blue's starting time for New Shepard. But at some point, if space tourism becomes a real tourism industry, depending on how the Space Force materializes and what capabilities it has, it might be very beneficial in many different ways that we can't conceive of right now for space tourism. It's not just about can they go up and rescue somebody stuck in a lousy space tourism orbit in a damaged capsule. I think that's a long time away. But there may be a lot of other ways where the Space Force could play a role in similar fashion to how you know, the Coast Guard plays a role. I mean, the Coast Guard mandates a lot of safety equipment for vessels. Maybe as space tourism develops, the Space Force will take on the role of how to have the best safety for space tourism or something like that. So I am of the opinion that the Space Force is a win all the way around. And I hope it's not downplayed by government. I think it needs to be nourished and it needs to grow. And I actually think it needs to be independent of the Air Force. It needs to be its own service on equal footing to the other services. I don't like seeing it to be part of the Air Force, and I think it's different than the Marine Corps being part of the Navy. I think the Space Force should have its own service, and I suspect within 5 to 7 years, it will be its own service.
Okay. Actually, I'll ask you a question, or really it's two sort of related questions of my own. So back near the beginning of this event, you said that basically that there was sort of excessive optimism about you know, the speed at which progress would be made in terms of space tourism and other things like that. So I guess question number one, how can we be more realistic about it? And number two, do you think though that in some sense that optimism is a good thing on the basis that, you know, if people really knew how hard it was going to be, that they might not even try?
So first of all, I think there's a difference between accepted and expected. So I think we expected, we meaning a larger group of people, we expected that space tourism would be 2 years away every 2 years because of the success of X Prize. And the companies did not do anything to sort of dissuade us from having that kind of unrealistic expectation. And I don't think many of us have fully accepted that it is taking so long. It is really hard. We're still not there. And just the very nature of the question, why is it taking so long, tells me that it's not accepted that it's taking so long. So I think the companies probably believe their own PR, if you want to know the truth. I don't think we're being intentionally and evilly misled. I think they believe we could do this. And look, we just did it, right? We won the X Prize. We had 3 flights. And all we have to do is scale up, and we've got Burt Rutan, and we've got Scaled Composites, and we've got Northrop, and on and on and on. And it just didn't unfold. But the optimism and the enthusiasm and the game plan only just intensified. And on the case of Virgin, it intensified because Sir Richard Branson was really exceptional at raising hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. He raised money from the UAE. He raised money from other people. I don't remember how many tickets they sold back in the glory day of selling tickets to a non-existent flight, but I think it was in the neighborhood of 650 or more tickets were sold in advance, with sizable deposits made on that ticket price, which is not guaranteed to be refunded to you. Many people bought X-Corps tickets, and X-Corps went bankrupt and was liquidated. And I honestly don't know what happened to the people who bought tickets. They were going to fly out of South America, and I think I forget the tourist company that was helping them to sell their tickets, but they didn't sell as many tickets as did Virgin, but they did sell quite a few. I think for the other companies other than Blue Origin, investors primarily lost their money. I don't think they were, I don't know that Rocket Plane was selling very many tickets, but I don't think they advanced enough in selling tickets. And I might just throw in a mention, because of Rocket Plane, the late great Chuck Lauer, who was part of Rocket Plane and frequently on the space show, and a good friend of mine passed away a few days ago. And I want to give a shout out to his memory. And companies coming after were built on the shoulders of people like Chuck and failed companies like Rocket Plane. And it's important that we remember those who came before and those ventures that came before, even though they didn't work, they've led to ventures that do work. But in answer to your question, I think we wanted to believe so badly that space tourism was 2 years away, and we were willing to believe it, that so many of us, myself included, we just kept believing, well, they'll get it right 2 years away. And until we became at the point where we don't believe it anymore, and we become either cynical or skeptical, or we question what the markets will be like. When I wrote a dissertation on space tourism, I didn't question the market width and breadth at all. I thought it would just, grow like gangbusters. And here you hear me tonight questioning the depth of the market for suborbital space tourism. That's what happens with 20 years of non-activity of something that you were a true believer in, and maybe you're not such a true believer anymore. I still want to see it happen. I think it's an industry that has great promise, and I hope it unfolds safely by whoever undertakes it, be it Virgin, be it Blue, or be it somebody else. I hope it does become a contributor to the space economy. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. I guess sort of to follow up. So how do we sort of get past the self-deception, if you want to put it that way? And
So first of all, you need to get out of the fantasy dream state. And I have to tell you that space is a what an attractive nuisance is. It's like if you have a swimming pool in your yard, and it's an attractive nuisance for other kids in the neighborhood to fall in and get hurt, or you get hurt. And if you don't make an effort to protect your attractive nuisance, to keep kids out or animals out or something, you could be held liable in almost any state in the union for having an unshielded attractive nuisance. So space in itself, especially the lure of human spaceflight and going places, be it an O'Neillian colony or a hotel or to the moon or Mars, this is an attractive nuisance. It attracts a lot of people. And I see their emails. I see their theories of everything. I see their proposals for stuff that I can't even explain as the new interstellar flight propulsion, all sorts of things. So space attracts all of that, and it attracts true believers. And I raised my hand. I've been a true believer. Much of my doctoral dissertation is true believer stuff. And in fact, that may get rectified if I write my 20-year history of the space show. That's part of what I want to address. And my advisors were true believers, okay? Because what they passed me on, including from Stanford and Boeing, that never happened either. So true believerism is rampant in the space industry, as is fantasy. So if you really want to avoid deception, you need to ground yourself in a hell of a lot of due diligence. And I have to tell you, it's not as much fun. Doing due diligence on what it takes to do suborbital space tourism, for example, safely, is not nearly as much fun as being a true believer and let your mind run wild on a space tourism flight and having the time of your life and seeing just incredible views and stuff like that. But number one, you got to learn how to do real due diligence. And number two, you have to kind of be cynical with what companies put out there and what they tell you. And you have to read between the lines. There's no one looking over their shoulders like the SEC to make sure that they're telling you honest stuff, that their numbers are for real, that the accounting statements are all totally accurate. You got to cut through all of the hype and do some evaluation yourself, or you've got to look at the track records of the people involved and what are their track records in selling you on ideas. Do their ideas materialize, or do they go from one idea to another idea? So there's a lot of education that you have to do if you really want to free yourself from being a true believer. Or you can just be a true believer over a number of years and you'll probably cure yourself on your own. John, do you want to say something?
Yeah, well, just real briefly, I think you pretty much covered it, but I would ask the questions that David asks all the time, which is, what's your timeline and what's your technology readiness level to achieve what you want to do? And then let them explain how they're going to, meet their grand vision.
You know, some of the better years of the space show, I have been an absolute true believer of space tourism and quite a few other things. And, John, watching Kim work on Moonwards, Dan, and many others on this list, and some who didn't come on. Jim Logan is another one on human flight and space medical issues. Oh, wow. You will be locked out of being a true believer pretty quickly if you start thinking about what Jim Logan says and why we don't have a gravity prescription for humans beyond low Earth orbit. That's a huge deal. And I'll never forget what Jim has told me, and John knows it, and Kim knows it, is that NASA's not serious if they won't go out and find a gravity prescription for human spaceflight beyond LEO, because nobody knows what it is. And we're not doing that now. We're talking about going to Mars, and Musk is talking about going to Mars, and we're talking about a gateway with humans orbiting the moon, and we're talking about a lunar habitat, and who the hell knows what with cislunar space. Where is the gravity prescription? How do we know where humans can flourish and where humans are going to get into trouble? And then if you really want to have settlements or colonies, depending on what language you want to use, settlements usually imply you have kids, you have schools, you have stores, you have something that is comparable to what we know as a settlement here on Earth, regardless of what country you may live in or how primitive your country may be. How do you do that in space? We don't have any information on pregnancy, on children, on fetal development, on anything like that. Nothing. How do you even get the research? How is the research even ethical to do? I mean, we talk about that a lot on the space show. Nobody knows how to do any of this as ethical research. And you can't do chimps and a lot of large primates. They're out of the question now. Not that you would want to do that anyway. So there are an awful lot of questions to talk about. And yet Musk is talking about how many hundreds or thousands of people going to Mars by what deadline, how many people are going to be going to the first space hotel. It's going to be in LEO, but ultimately there'll be hotels beyond LEO. So there's a lot of questions out there. And if you look at these things from a grounded, informed understanding of what's involved in accomplishing them, that knocks you off your true believer position pretty quickly.
Well put.
And I'm still a true believer in many things. I can't wait to be interviewing ETs on their spaceship someday. Maybe one of the Tic Tacs, I'll be able to do a space show from there. I do it in jest, but nothing would make me happier than to have an ET space show program. So maybe in my lifetime that'll happen. Talk about true believerism. Kim, anything that you would like to offer up as we near the end of this webinar?
Well, I think you touched on something, but I just would like to give a nod to it, that you have, over all your shows, been careful to challenge people on what their plans are, how they're going to realize their vision. And I regard that as part of the space show, part of its service to the community. And do you have anything to say about how you wake people up there?
Well, here's the thing. There is no shortage of outstanding, amazing wonderful plans to do things in space. I promise you, there's no shortage of them. The shortage is on how to breathe life to these plans, how to make some of them work, how to do something with it other than just close the PowerPoint and kumbaya, I've done my part. So, you know, when a guest comes on and they're not a crackpot or fringe, and they actually have what I think might be a really good idea, I will say, you know, kind of near the end of the show, well, what's next? What do you do to make that happen? And here's what usually happens. Dead air continues for as long as I'm allowing it to continue, okay? Because the truth is, they don't know how to make it happen. This is why Elon Musk, and you can criticize him if you want, and a lot of other people, he knows how to take an idea and make it happen. Now, yes, he's got billions of dollars, but he didn't always have billions of dollars. He knows how to do that. John knew how to make a blog that counts. Kim knew how to take her idea for what she wanted to do about visualizing a city on the moon and making this something that the general public could get and appreciate. She knew how to start the venture. So people come up with a good idea, and I'll say toward the end of the discussion, what's next? How are you going to breathe life into it? How do you make it happen? And that, you know, 99% of them don't have a clue. And they'll eventually start talking, and they'll say, I don't know. And then you'll see how it really stops with the fact that they've written the paper, made the PowerPoint, they've come on the space show and presented it to the air, and now it's just supposed to filter into the hands of someone who will run with it from that point on. And I give them some ideas, but almost all the ideas I always throw out are met with resistance. And that's because most people are not capable of taking their idea and doing something with it. And it's a shame because there are a lot of really great ideas out there. But if the people who create the ideas aren't going to run with it, it's very hard to find someone else to take over ownership of it and develop it. John, it looks like you want to get in on the act.
Oh, no, I just, the reason I like the space show so much is that we do have a very intelligent listeners, and they will call in and ask appropriate questions, or they'll post questions on a blog, and they usually get to the truth very quickly.
Well, I like to ask these people, what's next? How do you, my favorite expression is, how do you breathe life into your project? How do you make it happen? And I like to hear their plans. And if they actually give me a plan, I'll critique it a little bit with them. Not that I have all the answers, because clearly I don't. And if they say, I don't really know, do you have any ideas? Well, maybe I have a few ideas. Maybe some listeners might email in or call in with an idea or post a comment on the blogs to the archive show. But almost every time, the good idea dies with the person because that person is not able to carry it forward to the next level. And I think that's a shame. Why is that so? Well, I'm not an educator by training, but I suspect it has a lot to do with the kind of education we are in, maybe the kind of environment we live in, maybe the kind of jobs we've had where, you know, we do what is expected of us or what our bosses tell us, we follow the instructions. But to go create and to go make happen something out of midair that is just a thought, that's a really special person, whether their project goes belly up like X-Core or a rocket plane, or whether it flourishes like SpaceX. SpaceX didn't almost flourish, it almost went under if his fourth and final Falcon 1 launch had not worked. Elon has frequently said that was the end of SpaceX. So everything has limits to it. But fortunately, Falcon 1 did work. And by the way, the Eric Berger from Ars Technica new book, Liftoff, talks about what happened with SpaceX and those Falcon 1 launches. And Eric will be on the show later in April, but he's been on a lot of programs that you can pick up his interview, and you should pick up his book, Liftoff, because it tells that story. But not everybody is a Musk, and not everybody is a Jeff Grayson who started XCore, and I could go down the list, with other people. But that doesn't stop them from having a great idea. They just don't know what to do with it after they have it, and they don't know how to distribute it and get it out there. Maybe they'll write a space review article, and then they'll think that they've done a good job. They've got it out there in the ether, or they'll present it at an AIAA conference, and they'll write a paper about it. And so they've gotten it out into the universe, and maybe that's all they want to do with it, is get it out there. But some of these ideas really deserve a chance at being put into reality. And I wish there were ways to help people do that.
All right, awesome. Well, that is our time for the night. Thank you very much to Dr. David Livingston and Kim Holder and John Jossy for agreeing to be with us this evening. And thank you to everybody, all of our attendees in the audience, for tuning in and submitting your questions. And do feel free to keep an eye on our website for future events and also mailing lists as well. So with that, I'll say good night. Thank you again.
Thank you, Eric.
Good night, everybody.
AIAA for hosting this, and all of you for attending and your questions. And listen to the Space Show.
Yep.
Absolutely.
thespaceshow.com or drspace@thespaceshow.com. And if you want to meet John or Kim, I'll put you in touch with them.
Cool.
Thank you, Eric.
Great.
All right, awesome. Thank you all very much. Have a good one.
Bye.
Good night.